Thank you for joining us in today's webinar. Yes, once again, my name is Alison Keenan. I am the head of Albert Cook Library at Makerere University College of Health Sciences. I am also a member of the Campbell Methods Information Retrieval Working Group. Today, we are presenting Searching in Campbell Reviews, Improving and Creating the Evidence Base. And we have two presenters. The first presenter is Ciara Young, who is a social sciences senior librarian at the Carnegie Mellon University, Pittsburgh, in the USA. And the second one is Keenan, who is a research fellow at Queen's University, Belfast, UK. Both presenters are conveners of the Campbell Methods Information Retrieval Working Group. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. We shall have the two presenters give their presentations. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type them into the question box into your Zoom control panel. I'll bring them up during the presentations, and we shall also have time for questions at the end of the presentations. So without wasting time, I have the pleasure to invite Ciara Young to start her presentation.
I think Kira's going to actually get us started, so hand it off to her.
Yes, thank you so much, Alison. So today I want to talk a little bit about the current practices we use in Campbell for those who are not so familiar with the internal processes. And I have been an information retrieval specialist for the education coordinating group based here in Queen's University, Belfast, since 2017. And along with Ciara, who's the other presenter today, we started the information retrieval group in 2018. I have also been a methods editor for Campbell since 2018. So although I feel like I have quite a good understanding of what we do within Campbell's education coordinating group, I also want to note that other coordinating groups may do something slightly differently to what I indicate here in this webinar. So there are a few things that I will cover before I hand over to Ciara in a little bit. The first will be the methodological expectations of search processes in Campbell collaboration intervention reviews. The second will be the internal search peer review processes that we use within the coordinating groups. And then the final topic that I will cover will be the Campbell methodological paper, which is Searching for Studies. The first thing that I wanted to say in this webinar is that Campbell systematic reviews present a quality and comprehensive overview of the available evidence, both through the quality of the methods involved and by following strict editorial guidelines. And ensuring the quality of the search process is vital to reducing the risk of bias in the review process. So when a review team are planning their protocol and writing the search methods in the protocol to indicate how they plan to locate the relevant studies, there are a few types of bias they should be aware of. First, we often see that authors might include search limiters. And a really common one that I see in my job as an information retrieval specialist at peer reviews is the year of publication. This decision is typically fine if there is a conceptual or theoretical reason, or sometimes we'll see a methodological reason. So the review might be an update to a previously conducted search, for example. And that's totally sound, methodologically sound. But there are some cases where the decision made seems to be an arbitrary one, and the review team might indicate that they're searching for studies in the past 2 decades, for example, but there's not really a clear rationale as to why other decades aren't as relevant. And I think sometimes the team might not be fully aware that by imposing those search limiters and constraints, they're effectively removing a relevant body of evidence. Sometimes as well, we see that review teams don't search a comprehensive range of information sources. So they might restrict their search to only major databases that are known to them. But the problem is that it's not fully comprehensive of all the information sources that exist. To just indicate why that might be a problem, a paper found that a database search using only Medline will return only 30 to 80% of relevant trials. And then one that many of us as information retrieval specialists will certainly know of is publication bias. And publication bias is basically the risk that you take when you only include peer-reviewed research or research that's available in those information sources that are produced by commercial publishers. Robert Rosenthal, as early as 1979, talked about this file drawer problem, and that's where studies with negative effects or non-statistically significant effects are less likely to be published. So this basically means that research that is only peer-reviewed or available in information sources that are commercially published would be skewed toward that research which has positive results. And the problem with that is that it's not an accurate representation of totality of the existing research evidence. And my way of providing a really simple description of this is that we're only seeing the evidence through rose-tinted glasses if you remove grey literature. So by way of introduction, I have indicated just a few of the various biases that are possible when locating studies for inclusion, but many of those biases can be avoided by involvement of an information retrieval specialist or subject librarian as an author in the review team. So you might wonder now, after I've said all this, what guidance do Campbell produce to ensure that teams are doing a rigorous job with the search methods that they use? And one really useful resource that's available is the methodological expectations of Campbell Collaboration Intervention Review, which is a mouthful, but it's also known as the Messier standards. And these standards are for both the conduct and reporting of Campbell systematic reviews of intervention effects. These Messier standards, they aim to reduce the bias and error and also increase transparency at each step of the review process. Just to properly cite the Messier standards, they're based on and adapted from the 2012 version of Cochrane Messer conduct and reporting standards by Chandler and colleagues. And in turn, that was based on the guidance that was provided in the Cochrane handbook. And also alongside the Cochrane handbook, there was an extensive consultation process to provide these standards. In the slide, you see I've added some screenshots of the Messier standards for intervention reviews because this is the most common type of systematic review that we see. However, there are Messier standards for evidence and gap maps. And a group of us are actually working on a set of Messier standards for meta reviews, which are also known as umbrella reviews or reviews and reviews. One thing that I think is important to point out here is that there are conduct standards, and conduct standards are going to be more relevant for review teams at the title registration and protocol stage, because this is where the review teams are describing their plans for the review. And the reporting standards then become more relevant at the review stage where things actually get reported. So one other important point, just looking at this slide, is that there are specific statuses that are attached to these Messier standards. And some of those you can see on the second column there on the screen. So mandatory means that a new review or protocol will not be published unless the standard is met. Highly desirable means that it should generally be done, but there can be justifiable exceptions to that rule. And then optional means that the standard is implemented at the review team's own discretion. I should also say that these Messier standards have been designed and are made available in a really user-friendly way. So they're provided as an editable Word document. And you can see there on the slide that there's an empty column in the Messier document, which allows authors to indicate exactly where and how they adhere to the methodological expectation. There are a large number of items, and this is something that I sometimes hear from Campbell authors. But I think that some of these standards are really easily met. So for example, they might ask for the names of the review team, and that's not hard to provide. One overarching thing though that I tend to say is that the Messier is really useful for authors because the guidance makes it really clear what you should do and why you should do it. But I think a really nice output from that as well is that it seems to speed up the editorial and peer review process. And I think that's because authors have to address the gaps in their methodology before they submit. And also in that empty column that you can see on the screen there, they have to indicate where in the document that they have addressed a particular standard. So the peer reviewer and the editorial team can clearly see whether or not a protocol or a review meets Campbell's high standards, and also where in the document they can check that that's happened. So just to dip back to what I said here at the outset, the Campbell editorial groups help ensure that all Campbell systematic reviews present both a quality and fully comprehensive overview of the evidence. And how they do that is through a really rigorous peer review process. So peer review, I'm sure all of us are aware, but just to indicate again, peer review assesses the quality of a systematic review before it is published in the Campbell Collaboration Journal website through Wiley. And I cannot overstate how rigorous this process is, because it usually involves 2 content experts, 1 information retrieval expert, a methods expert, and then the editorial team too, who will directly liaise with the review team. So sometimes there's up to 10 sets of eyes on each protocol or review that you read through the Campbell Collaboration Journal. But just to focus in on why we're here today, submitted protocols and reviews will be reviewed by an information retrieval expert, and myself and Patrick LaBelle do that for the education coordinating group. And we're typically asked to evaluate, well, the main thing is, are the search strategies that are employed or planned to be employed sound and coherent to fulfill the research objectives? But we also assess things like whether or not the review is duplicating already published work, because we obviously want to minimize research waste and we want to minimize duplication of effort across review teams. And we just want to make sure that the search methods are really transparent and clear for publication. We would then feed all this feedback to the editorial team, and they'll liaise directly with the review team, and they might ask for clarification, or they might ask for a change in search methods. But typically it's a very supportive process, with the objective being that we help improve the methodological rigor of all Campbell reviews. So I said earlier that the Messier standards are one form of guidance that Campbell offers, but there's also this really excellent information retrieval guide by Cugley and colleagues. And there's a real beauty to this guide, I feel, because it maps directly to the Messier standards. And it's important that review teams both read and understand the guidance, because there's things that are just much more comprehensive than someone could explain. And by reading and understanding and knowing exactly what you need to do, but also why you need to do it, I think is a really useful resource. And there, you can see on the slide, there's even a mandatory standard there to ensure that that happens. One thing I would say about this methodological paper that Campbell has produced is that there's a really nice comprehensive sources to search section, and that's useful for review teams just to help create the search strategies. But I say all of this with the huge disclaimer that review teams should be involving an information retrieval specialist or subject librarian, because that gets rid of a lot of the biases that I started off with. But it also is, it also indicates a quality search process. So that was a really brief overview of current practices in the Campbell collaboration. And it's my pleasure to hand over to Ciara Young, who's going to talk a little bit about the information retrieval group here in Campbell, its current work, and how to improve quality through research. I just want to remind everybody to please post any questions or discussion points in the chat box, and we'll be happy to get to those at the end of Ciara's presentation. So over to you, Ciara.
Great. Thank you so much, Ciara, for that great introduction and great overview of all of the standards and methods that are in place currently in Campbell collaboration systematic reviewing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So for the next portion of this talk, I'm basically just going to be giving you a brief introduction to our information retrieval methods group, and then talking about a little bit of work that we're doing toward improving and advancing some of the search methods and reporting that Ciara just covered in the first part of the talk. Okay. So for a little background on the Campbell Information Retrieval Methods Group, the current form of the group was assembled first in 2018, and membership has since then grown to around 50 members or so of information specialists, librarians, really from around the world, with interest and expertise in evidence synthesis searching methods, and many of us with a focus working in the social sciences. I would say we're sort of a project-oriented group, so we collaborate quite a bit on projects to improve search practices, but we also contribute to areas related to training and capacity building for information specialists and researchers. And we have other projects that contribute in different ways to evidence-based decision-making. So currently, one of the projects that we're working on is a research project to assess the current search methods and reporting in Campbell systematic reviews. And this is what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the talk. So to start, just with a little bit of background, we just heard Ciara talk about the various methods, guidelines, and standards that are available to guide best practices for systematic reviewing. But despite this, there's actually quite a bit of evidence that many systematic reviews that make it to publication are still lacking in quality related to search methods and reporting. And in this way, they're not reproducible. And so there's quite a bit of evidence and research that has pointed to this. And I've added a few examples on this slide of some work that's been done to look at the systematic reviews published in discipline-specific journals. So for example, a 2018 study that looked at 530 published systematic reviews in dentistry found that actually none of them had provided a complete report of the search and selection process. In pediatrics and surgery, a 2016 study found that only 1/3 of those that they looked at reported the full search strategy that was used. And fewer than 1/4 of those actually reported the date of the search. And I think other deficiencies have been found in veterinary science, in psychology, and likely other fields as well that aren't represented on this slide. So work has also been done to look at the search quality and reporting of systematic reviews published by systematic reviewing focused organizations like Cochrane and the Joanna Briggs Institute, which of course, really strive for high quality, rigorous systematic reviews and include folks with expertise in systematic review methods in their peer review process. And so I think there's certainly an expectation, a reasonable expectation that these reviews would be doing better than those published in the general literature. And I think the evidence does indicate this is the case. But even so, some research has shown, even with those reviews published by these organizations, there's still room for improvement when it comes to conducting and reporting of searches. So just a couple of examples here. There's a 2018 study by Franco and colleagues that found, looking at 70 Cochrane reviews, that most actually did in fact meet the reporting standards for Cochrane, but they still found a few issues in the design of the search strategies related to things like database syntax, spelling errors, missing keywords, and subject headings. A very recent study that looked at qualitative reviews published by JBI found that there was a lack of clear information about the date of the search in just over 1/4 of the reviews. So what do we know about Campbell? Well, I would say we don't really know too much about the quality and conduct of reporting and reporting of searches in Campbell reviews yet, as there's not really been a systematic effort to assess this. However, recently, Wong and colleagues did publish a great work that looked at the broad sort of methodological and reporting characteristics of Campbell reviews. And they focused on reviews published from 2011 to 2018. This was a total of 96 reviews. And in this assessment, they did really address some areas of searching, including reporting of information sources, reporting of search dates, and reporting of search terms. And so even in Campbell reviews, despite some of the rigor that Ciara talked about in terms of the peer review process and guidelines, there were still some potential insufficiencies here around search reporting. So for example, there was a lack of source date coverage reported in just under half of the reviews. They also found that hand searching methods were reported in only about half of the reviews. and that the searches used for conference abstracts were reported in only about 16% of studies. And so what we are looking to do in our work is really take a deeper dive into the search methods and reporting aspects of Campbell systematic reviews. So to do this, we're going to be looking at reviews published since January of 2017. And we chose this date limit in part because we really want to understand current practices around searching in Campbell reviews. And this also does give us a pretty good sample size of about 60 to 70 reviews to assess. Also, sort of conveniently, about half of the reviews in this sample set have searches that were conducted prior to the publication of the Kugli et al. Guidance document that Ciara mentioned, and half had searches that were conducted after the document was published. So one thing we'd really like to look at is whether or not reviews that reference this document or that conducted searches after the document was published, if they present any kind of improvement in the conduct and reporting of searches. We also have about 70 data extraction items that we are going to be recording. This includes items about the sources that were searched, details about the search strategy, information about supplementary searching methods such as web-based searching and the use of search engines, as well as other aspects of searching and retrieval. So some of our research goals with this project is, we want to firstly examine how searches are currently conducted in Campbell systematic reviews. We also want to identify any potential new methods that are being used in the search process. So for example, are folks using automation or machine learning for term harvesting, or are there other sorts of novel or unconventional methods that might be in use in these reviews? Like I said, we're also interested in assessing the impact of the search guidance document that was published in 2017. And we're also really interested in looking at adherence to reporting standards. So, Ciara had talked about messier reporting standards. There's also a recently published new extension to the PRISMA checklist called PRISMA S. So this is specifically a checklist for reporting on items related to the search. And so we'll be able to use this checklist and messier standards as a sort of kind of rubric or metric to measure adherence to standards in Campbell reviews based on the data that we extract from those reviews. So we are quite a ways from having results to report on here. We are currently in the protocol publication phase. The protocol has been revised and resubmitted. Hopefully we'll see that in publication soon. And our work will really get underway over the next half of this year. As far as how the results will be applied, we're really interested in thinking about how these findings can be put to use to improve or update guidance, as well as the editorial processes for Campbell systematic reviews. And in particular, we're interested in how this work might inform the search peer review processes that Ciara mentioned, and the documentation that goes along with that. We're also thinking that this work could be used as a sort of benchmark to assess the effectiveness of any changes that might be made to guidance documents or other processes or policies, to really understand how these changes improve search methods and reporting in the future, with the intent here to update this assessment probably within 3 to 5 years. Another thing that this work can inform is outreach and training efforts for Campbell systematic review author teams. So really sort of identifying pain points or areas where there might be some insufficiencies around reporting or search quality and methods, and then targeting training and guidance efforts to these areas to ensure that author teams have the information, the training and expertise that they really need to produce high quality reviews with reproducible searches. So that gives you a bit of a snapshot of our work that's currently going on related to methods. We are certainly open to more members in our group, and we really encourage folks, particularly information specialists or librarians with an interest in evidence synthesis methods, also researchers who are involved in conducting search and retrieval, really to get involved. We have a lot of great projects going on and surely more in our future. So I've provided an email address if you want to get in touch. And there's a link here to a Google form that is just a quick way to get involved and join in our quarterly meetings. And finally, I'd just like to acknowledge the many people who have contributed to the methods work that I've been talking about here. So this is our team, and many thanks to them for their contributions and insights into the work so far. And finally, the last couple of slides here contain references to works that we've referenced in the talk. And we're happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Okay, I might jump in because I know that Alison was having
Hello,
some issues.
thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, can you hear me, Sarah?
Yep.
Can you hear me, members?
Yes,
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah, for this presentation, and thank you, Ciara, for the introduction. I can see we have a few questions in the chat. Right now, I would like to open up. I hope there is no other presentation, Ciara, from you.
No, I've done mine, Alison. Thank you.
Now, okay. So now we have a few questions in the chat, but I would like to open the discussion. If there are questions and comments that people would like to ask, please raise your hand and you'll be allowed to talk before we look at the chat.
Yeah, well, I might go ahead and address a question in the chat.
Or maybe let's start with the chat, with what is in the chat. So someone from WHO, Thomas from WHO, says Sarah Young. The line is.
Yeah, Alison, I think you're breaking up a little bit. I can see the chat, so I can go ahead and answer Thomas's question. So he asks.
The line is breaking.
Yeah, he asks. Yeah, so in one of the slides I showed that Cochrane, one of the studies about Cochrane found that 73% showed some sort of search design problems. And the question is, isn't that quite subjective as search strategies are adapted to search interfaces and also to the research question at hand? And that's a really great point. I think in that study, the design problems that they were noting were actually things like spelling errors and places where truncation maybe should have been used, errors in syntax. I think they were looking at things that would not be necessarily as subjective, subjective sort of criteria. But it is a good point, and I think we've certainly been thinking about this in our project in terms of how do we evaluate the quality of searches when it's hard to know what decisions might have been made by a research team in terms of what search terms to include, not to include, certainly maybe subject headings that were left out specifically because they didn't address the question. And so, yeah, I think this does bring up a really interesting point about sort of the challenges in assessing search quality in reviews that you aren't involved in. So we're sort of addressing this by kind of sticking to criteria related to standards and really reporting, and not so much, whether or not keywords that we think might have been more comprehensive were used or not used, if that makes sense. It's a really great point, and I think, yeah, one well taken. So thanks for that question.
I might just take another question that I see in the chat, Sarah, and then hand over to you. And this is from George Texera. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Are grey literature searches very topic specific? For instance, for sports sciences, what grey sources would you recommend? So huge disclaimer from me is that I'm have no knowledge of sports science. I haven't worked on reviews of sports science. But sometimes if there's not like clear guidance from a library or whatever based on that topic, I might look at websites for relevant information. So here in Ireland, for example, there are two websites that come to mind. So Sport Ireland, and then the Physical Association of Sports Science in Ireland, to see what resources they have available, if they're producing relevant information for your review, but also if they are linking to information sources that might be relevant for you to search. Again, I would say if you're affiliated with an institution or have access to an information retrieval specialist in that topic, they will have a good overview of the important information sources to search for. And that's really all I have to say on that question. Do you have anything to add to that, Sarah?
No, I think that really addresses the question.
Yeah. One final point I would make as well is that often you see university publishing reports on their university portal, but nowhere else. So sometimes for reviews, I will look at the discipline that I'm interested in to see what various universities are producing, but of course that comes with its own bias. So my selection bias, that I'm searching probably universities that are known to me or known for producing this kind of information. But the lens.org, they have this really cool, freely accessible tool that you can use where you search specific disciplines, and it will show you which universities are producing most evidence in this area. So you can add a little bit of objectivity to searching for grey literature information in universities or institutions that are producing it as well.
So let's see. Carol, thanks for jumping in there regarding the study on Cochrane reviews. Yes, hopefully over time we're getting better. Okay, Sabina has a question here. What do you think can be done to ensure that authors describe search strategies as descriptively and with as much transparency as possible? Great question. So Ciara, presented on the Messier checklist. Another thing I mentioned was Prisma S, which is an extension, recently published extension to the Prisma checklist, which goes into quite a lot of detail about reporting for specifically the searches. So that's, I think, a great document to reference and something maybe to pass along to colleagues as another resource that can help them in reporting sufficient information to make their searches reproducible and transparent. I don't know, Ciara, do you have any other thoughts on that one?
I think just as well, leading by good example and perhaps having some exemplar reviews of really good reporting, maybe hosting those on a repository for review teams to emulate. I mean, I don't know if that's already available. And if so, it'd be great if someone posted it in the chat. You know, I know that there are various information retrieval groups that you know, for example, with Cochrane information retrieval specialists, where they'll share search strategies and hedges. But I would really love to see examples of good reporting, and you know, not just that you searched Google Scholar, but how you searched it, making reference to the character limits that Google has, the fact that there can be differences in the search results based on geographical location, how we're not really sure whether or not the algorithm changes the results and how it changes the results. And also, I think a lot of people are unaware that, you know, there is a limit to 1,000 search results that you can export, which I use Housing, Publish or Perish to export. But sometimes you'll just see, we search Google Scholar and that's all you'll see. So I think that there has to be increased transparency at all stages of the review process. So not just in the electronic databases, but across grey literature sources as well. And that will improve the field. So that's all I would really say, just leading by a good example. I am happy to take the next question, Ciara, from a really well-known information retrieval specialist, and that is where to find the best guidance for automated term harvesting and screening for beginners. So I'll start off by saying I don't know a lot about automated term harvesting. I am aware of one that is being used across various review teams, and I'll just post a link to that actually in the chat so everyone can have a look. But I don't actually know a lot about how it works, whether or not we want to use automated term harvesting or any of the issues that are associated with it. I would say that there is really good guidance for these things for screening and automation. The newly updated Prisma 2020 has included lots in their flow diagram, for example, about automation, and alongside that with the guidance paper that was led by Matthew Page. But unfortunately, I can't lend much more information to that answer, but perhaps you could, Ciara.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to contribute there. I mean, as I mentioned, this is one thing we'll be looking at in our review of Campbell reviews. And I think understanding what people are doing is, you know, a step in the right direction in terms of maybe informing what guidance needs to be developed for this kind of thing. So yeah, that's all I'll say on that. Okay, we have a question from Howard. How much do search strategies vary according to the nature of the review question? For example, prevalence reviews versus effectiveness reviews. Yeah, that's an interesting question. And something, yeah, maybe this is something we could actually look at in our work. We hadn't thought of this, but I don't know. Ciara, do you have any thoughts on that one?
No, because I haven't worked on prevalence reviews actually. So no, I'm sorry. That's my quick answer.
Yeah, I mean, it might be interesting as part of our work to, you know, make note of the type of review and, you know, see if there's any impact on the way searches are being conducted there. But that's, yeah, an interesting point.
Okay, so Caroline asks if I have methodological questions that may not be explicitly covered in the methods documents, is it possible to connect in the future with the info retrieval group? So my answer would be absolutely yes. We have a Slack group where we post queries, but we're also welcome, to members joining. I would also say if you're a Campbell reviewer, the coordinating group that is dealing with your protocol or review will also be really helpful to answer a lot of these methodological questions. So these are experts with many years assessing and addressing research questions through systematic review methodology, and they're a really good protocol to ask those questions from. In the education coordinating group here in Queens, we have a weekly clinic where we'll meet one-to-one with review teams and directly answer those specific queries that you have, because I know that the guidance can never cover every question that a review team may have.
Okay, can we go to the next question? Yeah, sorry, I'm having challenges with the connection. So that was from Howard. How much do such strategies vary according? Okay, the next one is Caroline Higgins. If I have a methodological question that may not be explicitly covered in the methods document, is it possible to connect in the future with the information retrieval group? I think that one has just been answered by Ciara. Then Howard, the new Prisma extension for scoping reviews requires the same systematic approach as required for full systematic reviews. What is your view of this? Any comments on that, Ciara or Sarah?
Yeah, so my view on this may be quite contentious, but I don't necessarily agree with the new Prisma extension, because I think the purpose of a scope and review and systematic review are slightly different. So a scope and review will typically be used to provide an overview of the evidence base, but not necessarily getting into the same comprehensive detail of a systematic review. So for example, we might not be required to assess the quality. So I see the review types as slightly different. There's a really good paper by Andrew Booth and colleagues about the differences between these review types. So yeah, thank you, Howard, for a difficult question. But I think that I view a scope and search and a comprehensive systematic review search as slightly different. But perhaps, Sarah, you can articulate that slightly better than I, or you might have complete disagreement with what I've just said.
No, I would agree with you. I think in my experience, yeah, scoping reviews tend to sort of require a little more flexibility in methods, and yeah, I would agree. I have to say I need to sort of brush up on that particular extension to answer that question in any detail. But yeah, I think I'm in agreement there, Ciara.
There's actually like a lot of, sorry, Alison, there's a lot of really, really excellent information retrieval specialists on the call. And I wonder if any of you would like to unmute to add your thoughts to this discussion, particularly around the differences between scope and reviews and systematic reviews, because I would be really interested in whether or not there are topic-specific differences. But I'm not going to call anyone out or put pressure on anyone, but I know there are people with much more expertise than me.
Hello?
Hi, Alison. Yeah, I don't think anyone's taken me up on my offer, so we'll go on to the next question.
Well, this is Thomas Allen from the WHO. I don't have a camera, so I can't put it on, unfortunately. But I refer always to the Grant and Booth article that's quite famous for defining the reviews, because what I find is it's really important for people when they're doing research is to choose the right term to describe their review, because I always say to them, if you start going down a systematic review road, you're going to be bound by that. And, scoping review, a landscaping, an narrative review, what's your end purpose? And so I think it's important when we're talking about this, because then what happens is with a scoping review, you are given more flexibility, or like a rapid review. And I think I think people are being too much thinking that systematic review is the only way to do it, and that there's other ways of doing things, and that we should have the flexibility depending on the end purpose. So that was my experience from WHO, and particularly with the recent COVID outbreak, is we've been doing a lot of stuff, and we can't always follow the same standards that you would do for a systematic review. A rapid review has to be done much more quickly, and we have to modify it. So that's just my opinion. Over.
Thank you. That's really excellent to get your viewpoint on that, Thomas. And thank you as well for sharing the links to the course around automation. And that's something I'll certainly be checking out myself. There's a great question here from Marta Bastillo. If the review we are considering is not an intervention review, will Campbell still consider it? And my answer would be yes. We do have other types of review articles, including evidence and gap maps and overviews. And also we have a methods group that produce methodological papers as well for Campbell. I'm not sure if anybody from Campbell Central wants to answer this question. So hopefully my answer was
correct. So I'm jumping in. So I did put it in the chat already. So we are open to other types of review question as well. So we do have some associational reviews already. We have a couple of scoping reviews in progress. We're open to prevalence reviews. We don't have any yet. So currently any review question is allowable, but we only have standards for effectiveness reviews and evidence and gap maps for effectiveness studies. And so the approach we're taking is to, and what I call the suck it and see approach. So we're willing to take on different types of review and then develop what the appropriate standards are for those reviews and experimental method using those reviews as test cases like pilots. And that's ongoing. It's quite a slow process, but it is happening. And of course, we have our qualitative synthesis working group. So whilst we have a number of mixed method reviews already, we will start publishing solely qualitative reviews based on semantic synthesis once that working group concludes with its new guidelines, which should be coming out very shortly. And one thing I was going to mention more on that. Give me a moment. Oh, sorry, there's another question further down about different topics as well. So as we have education group, you are Ciara, crime and justice, international development, and so on. Campbell was set up to do basically what Cochrane does, but not in health. So we do take any subject but health and try and find a group where it will go. Sometimes it's a bit of a harder fit than others because they're not a really appropriate group. We're very keen to expand the number of Campbell groups. So if you've got an idea for a Campbell group on where we seem to have a gap, by all means approach us. And health itself is a bit of a grey area. So there's a lot of stuff around mental health in particular that fits very well in our social welfare group. So child protection, for example, Cochrane might see it's one of their areas, and they do have Cochrane reviews on child protection, but it's very much a Campbell area as well. So we have reviews, and we indeed have a child welfare group that takes reviews like that.
Thanks so much, Howard, for that. I scrolled on down through the chat and saw that Howard has answered many of these questions that I missed the first time around. So Sarah, this is a question that you might be well placed to answer, and it's from Caroline Higgins, and it's around encouraging transparent, reproducible search strategies and methods. So Caroline says that in commercial publications, word limits can be a big barrier, and they create a detailed document with details and suggest that they be included as an online supplemental material. Not really a question for you, actually, now that I read it. It's more of a comment. But I think that is something that's really useful to get across to review teams, that they don't have to include everything into the methods section of a review, but Wiley does allow in Campbell systematic reviews lots of supplemental material, and I think if it's important, you should include it. My biggest concern has always been under-reporting. I've never written back to a review team and said that they've provided too much detail, and I actually don't think that's possible. So I think whatever you've done, say you've done it really clearly, really transparently, so that anyone coming along who wants to update it or wants to try and replicate it, which I'm not sure how often that would actually happen in practice, but they could. And that's the thing I would say on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think one should not feel constrained in word limits and things like that. And there's always supplementary material. There's ways of providing supplementary material in, for example, open science framework, so pointing out to other open repositories. Yeah, I think that's a great point from Caroline. Looks like we might be at the hour.
I think we're at the hour. One thing I would say is that Lise Cotter has asked for some good sources on prevalence review standards. So before we shut off and end, and thank you all for attending, if anybody on the call has any of those golden nuggets for Lise, then please post them in the chat, and I think they will become available in the recording. I'm sorry that Alison has had some internet technicalities, issues with that, but we totally understand. So on behalf of everybody, I would like to thank you all for attending the monthly webinars, and I'll hand back over to Yashika to close.
I think we lost Yashika. I just saw that drop off. Also internet problems in Delhi as well. So I will do that. So thank you for attending. Thank you really, Sarah and Ciara. That was a fascinating session. We had over 60 participants at the height. So I do think it is a topic that people are very interested to learn more about. And we might be asking for a sequel before too long. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a pleasant morning, afternoon, evening, night as appropriate.